Hello again, everyone. I hope the Halloween season is treating you well. I hope you've got something warm to drink and a nice cozy place to sit as we thrust ourselves once more into the ghosts of Halloweens gone by. Today on Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's find 5 more great Halloween tales to get you in the mood for spooky season. This first story is a bit of a new one that we've read this year, but I think it's still a pretty great story. It talks about a trick-or-treater that gives more to the people he sees than they expected. Let's hear a story about a tricky treater. The kids moved aside as the blue and white lights lit the street, joining the strobing lights from the ambulance already on the scene. Car 7 on scene, EMS also on scene. Rogers put the radio down and took a step towards the house. Flights came up behind him, eyes sweeping the scene as he assessed the situation. That was why they made such great partners, he reflected as he mounted the steps and heard the wheels of the stretcher coming their way. Flights was methodical, a planner. He was always keeping his eyes peeled for trouble. Rogers was a man of action, a muscular bull who dwarfed most perps and cowed even the most belligerent of drunks. The shift captain often called Car 7 the toolbox because it contained one very careful screwdriver and one very sturdy hammer. The EMTs were coming out, the woman riding on the stretcher moaning into her oxygen mask. She was in her late 40s, Roger assessed, and looked like she'd taken a spill. There was a cut on her forehead, a long dribble of red down the front of her shirt where it had soaked in, and by the way she was moaning and blinking, Rogers thought she might have a concussion. One of the EMTs looked up as he noticed the burly cop, telling him they had the woman taken care of, but Rogers put a hand out before they could walk past him. "I need a statement. We need to know what happened." "Officer, I can appreciate your need to do your job, but this woman's in bad shape. She's suffered something pretty traumatic, and we need to get her checked out." Yeah, Rogers knew she'd been through one hell of an accident. The dispatcher had been pretty clear about the urgency of the call. The call had apparently come in about 7:40, about 15 minutes ago. The woman was saying something about a prowler. It was some kid who wouldn't get off the porch, and the lady said that he was wearing an upsetting mask. She hadn't elaborated on what it was that made it so upsetting, but when someone had started banging on her door, she had begun to scream, and that was when the dispatcher had advised a car to hurry to the scene. She had one of those life alert necklaces too, and the paramedics had beaten them by a nose. "I just need a minute. If this person is out there doing things like this, then we need a description." The paramedic leaned down and talked softly to the woman, her face moving strangely beneath the oxygen mask, and Rogers waited as flights took statements from the few people around the scene. He didn't think the woman was going to speak with him for a moment, but when she pulled the mask back a little, he breathed in a sigh of relief. She was the only real witness at the moment, and without her, they'd be hard-pressed to find the guy. "He was short," she said breathlessly. "I thought he was a kid at first. 5 feet, maybe less, in a white sheet. It looked like a death shroud, the kind of thing that was spattered with dirt and fake blood. I hope it was fake blood. They were barefoot, the feet black like a dead person." Rogers was nodding, taking down notes, and trying to compile some ideas on who he was looking for. Who the hell let their kid go out barefoot in a sheet? He didn't know, but It would make them easier to find. You told dispatch he had an upsetting mask. What kind of mask did he have, ma'am? The woman started shaking a little, her eyes getting hazy as she thought about it, and the paramedics started to move off before she started talking again. Her voice was steady, high, on the verge of hysterics. The mask looked like my late husband. He died in a car crash, and it looked just the way it did when I went to identify the body. His eyes were gone, his nose was broken, his lips had burst, his cheeks were... But the paramedics were moving away now, taking her to the ambulance and telling Rogers that she needed medical attention, not to relive something that was clearly making her condition worse. As they packed her in, Rogers watched it drive away as he closed her front door and went to speak with flights. Any luck? He asked, the other officer wishing a mother and her daughter a good night as they headed off for more trick-or-treating. Not so much. No one seems to have seen this kid, whoever they are. Well, I guess we can start canvassing the area. It was almost half an hour ago, though. Who knows where the kid could... But the radio squawked to life then, calling for Car 7 and asking them to head to a nearby house. The owner is advising they have a similar encounter with a kid in an unsettling mask. Rogers grabbed the handset and told Julia to send them the address. He and Flights hopped in the car, and as the address came through the computer and Rogers confirmed it was only a street up, the kid hadn't gone very far, it seemed. And as they weaved through the assembled kids, little goblins on their way for treats, Rogers couldn't help but feel a pang of longing. This would have been Claire's 9th Halloween. Rogers should be getting pictures of his wife and daughter as they went about their trick-or-treating, or, even better, been out there with them. He should have been preparing for Thanksgiving and Christmas, figuring out a schedule to visit his parents and Lily's, but that was all over now. There would be cold comfort and warm liquor to get him through the holidays, and a bottle of Jack on his nightstand would be waiting for him when he got off at 11. Up there, partner, Flight said, and Rogers shook his head as he pulled up onto the curb, and they approached the blue ranch-style home. The guy on the porch didn't need paramedics, but he looked distinctly shaken. He was a big guy, the flannel shirt showing off his broad shoulders and large arms, and the little cap on his head made Roger think he was supposed to be a lumberjack or something. He looked up when they came up the street, seeming glad but not particularly relieved. They headed off down Lafayette, he said, pointing left towards the line of streetlights that led deeper into the neighborhood. They were wearing a mask that... It looked like my dead wife. I don't know how I could. No one saw her after she died except for me, but it looked exactly like her. I asked them what the hell they were playing at once the initial shock wore off, and they just turned and walked off. When you say they couldn't have known what she looked like, what do you mean? Rogers asked, making notes. My wife, she died when we were rock climbing about 3 years ago. One of her anchors came out, and her line caught her just as she slammed into the edge of the mountain. She died instantly. It broke her neck, but I remember rappelling down and finding her face, a squishy mass of bloody flesh. I was the only one who saw her like that, other than the rescue guys and the mortician, I guess. There's no way a kid could have known what she looked like when she died. Just no way. How long ago did they come by? Rogers asked, hoping they were close. I guess about 10 minutes. I don't understand it. It's not possible. Shouldn't be possible. But Rogers cut him off. Do you need medical attention, sir? If not, we're going to go after this kid. They've been causing a lot of stir, and we'd like to figure it out before they get too far away." "No," the guy said, getting up and heading for the door. I'm fine. I think I'll just head to bed." He went inside and turned the porch light off, leaving the two of them in a strange semi-darkness. The kids quiet as they moved past the cruiser as it sat half on the sidewalk. "I'm gonna go head up the sidewalk and see if I can pick up his trail. Take the cruiser and head up Lafayette and see if you can catch him. Radio me if you hear anything, and I'll do the same." "Sounds like a plan, partner," Fight said, hopping in behind the wheel as Rogers walked through the thinning sea of trick-or-treaters. It was ticking closer and closer to 9, the time when most of the front porch lights generally went off and the kiddos headed home with their spoils. As he walked, Rogers scanned the crowd, looking for anyone in a shroud and a unique mask that seemed to change depending on the person. Rogers didn't know how that could be, but kids these days had all kinds of weird stuff. Maybe they did it through color patterns or subliminal signals or something like that. Regardless of the how, they were causing a disturbance that had potentially put someone in the hospital. Rogers needed to find him and put a stop to this before it was... "No! No! Stay away from me!" Rogers snapped his head to the left, looking towards the sound. The kids were scattering, some of them screaming, and he could see someone on the porch who was backing away from someone in a sheet. They were looming over the screamer, their back to Rogers, and when he approached, they turned and looked at him out of the corner of their eye. He got a brief glimpse of a girl's face, a young girl's face, before she took off running into the house. Rogers had drawn his gun and was proceeding forward to apprehend this whatever it was when he heard what the scared little man was gibbering. He heard it, and it froze him in place. "Not you! Can't be you! I killed you! I killed you! I killed you so long ago!" He went right on saying it, too, as Flights came up the stairs, rocking and shaking as Flights looked from him to Roger. "Cuff him and call it in." "Call what in exactly?" Flights asked, his gun lowered. "He's talking about having killed somebody. That sounds like an admission of guilt to me. I want to go get this thing that ran through the house. Just make sure he doesn't go anywhere till I check back, okay?" Flights nodded, and Rogers was off and through the house at a sprint. He was lucky he could catch her before she hopped the fence. He wasn't likely to be lucky, and when he came to the kitchen and found the back door wide open, he expected the only thing he would see was a pair of legs going over the wooden slats. Instead, he found her kneeling beside a large tree in the back, digging up the earth with her hands. "Freeze! Don't move! I don't want to..." But when she turned to look at him, the words died in his mouth. It was Claire. She was kneeling in the dirt, digging with her soft little hands. And when she looked up at him, her face held the same expression it had on the occasion that he had caught her doing something she knew she shouldn't. She looked up at him with mischievous knowledge, and when he looked at the spot she'd been digging, he saw something else. It was hard to take his eyes off her. She looked exactly the way she had before the accident. She looked like she had the last time he had seen her, when she had run to him after school and wrapped her arms around him like she had missed him all day. They had been getting ready to drive home, the three of them, but Flights had called him and said they had an emergency. Flights had come to the school to get him, and his wife and Claire had taken the car home. His wife had kissed him, his daughter had said that she loved him, and then they had driven away forever. They had been hit by a semi on the way home, and the next time he had seen them, they were in the morgue. Well, what was left of them was in the morgue. Beside her in the dirt were bones. Rogers was afraid to look at them for too long. He was afraid that if he looked away, Claire would disappear, and he'd never see her again. He knew she couldn't be real. He'd seen her and his wife into the ground. But when the girl looked up, Rogers looked up from the bones, and they locked eyes. "Trick or treat," Claire whispered, and then she disappeared, like ground fog with the dawn. The bones would turn out to belong to another girl, Bethany Taylor. She wasn't alone. There were 4 other girls buried out there, but Bethany was the one that the owner wouldn't stop talking about. He said that Bethany had come to trick or treat, wearing the flowing shroud and staring at him, and that was when he had started screaming. He never denied it, turning himself in and admitting to the crimes. Rogers and Flights were commended for their work, but Rogers had received something more than an accommodation that night. He'd gotten to see his daughter again, and to him, she would always be the one who had shown him the way to those girls. The bottle of whiskey was still on his nightstand a month later, a reminder that maybe there was more to life than slipping into oblivion. Officer Rogers had certainly received a trick and a treat that Halloween. Makes you wonder what might be under the mask of the little goblins on your own front porch, doesn't it? Moving right along, we find a tale told around a cozy lantern as candy is exchanged and odd noises appear in the woods. So let's hear a tale, a local legend, if you will, about Tin Can Tommy. We were sitting around in my old treehouse, this ragged edifice of my early childhood, and picking over the candy that we had gotten this year, when we heard the familiar sound. Everyone in town knew the sound. It had something to do with the old recycling center, or it had something to do with the old wastewater plant, or it was animals in the dump, but whatever it was, you could hear it circling the town like a predator on quiet nights. It was the clinking, clanking sound of metal, like tin cans on a string banging together, and it always gave me the shivers. "What's that sound?" asked Jeremiah. Jeremiah, though we called him Jerry, had only been in town for about a year. He didn't know about the old town legends or the stories that we'd all grown up with. To him, the sound was just an odd metallic clank, but to us, it was something our parents had told us about since we were young. "Don't you know?" Cameron asked, as he tossed aside a Werther's Original and grabbed up a bite-sized Kit Kat. Pickings had been slim this year on candy. We didn't know if it was because of the layoffs at the recycling center or because of the increase in shipping costs that made the groceries so expensive, but what we did know was that most of the grown-ups were out on their front porches enforcing the 2 or 3 pieces of candy per kid rule. It had meant that we'd gotten a sad collection of fun-sized candy bars and old lady candy, the latter not terribly appealing to a bunch of 14-year-olds who were probably too old to be trick-or-treating anyway. "No," Jeremiah said. "That's why I asked." "That's Tin Can Tommy making his rounds," Joel put in, before opening a box of malted milk balls and shaking them all into his mouth at once. "Who the hell is Tin Can Tommy?" Jeremiah asked. Cursing was something we had discovered only a few years ago, and it was still new enough that it was something we used every chance we got. "Tin Can Tommy is a local legend. In the late, Cameron began, but Joel waved a hand and pointed at me. Let Tyler tell it. He's better at it than any of us. Go on, Ty. Tell him about Tin Can Tommy. I was honored to be elected as the storyteller, and as I took the wrapper off a tiny Hershey bar, I began the tale that my grandmother had told me when I was barely 4 years old. In the late 40s and 50s, there was a string of murders in town. You see, in 1942, a drifter had been going around abducting and killing children in the town. This was when the railroad still ran through, so you occasionally got drifters and hobos that came through looking for work or just looking for a place to crash before they went somewhere else. Well, this fella had a taste for murder, and he had killed 5 kids before the locals finally figured out who it was. Now, there was some speculation on whether or not they got the right person. Some people said that Tommy was innocent and that they just decided to accuse him because he was a homeless guy. Some people said it was actually one of the guys in the mob that went to get him, and he was just covering up for his own sins. Whatever it was, they took Tommy and hung him from the big tree in the middle of town. They say he hung there for a whole month before he finally rotted down to nothing but bones and clothes. The townspeople congratulated themselves. They had taken out another dirty vagabond. But that was not where the story ends. All 3 of them leaned in close, even though Cameron and Joel had heard the story before. It was one of those stories that everybody heard, but nobody complained when it was retold. It's the kind of story that, even though you know it can't be real, you can imagine that it actually happened. Everybody has a relative who claims they were there. Everybody has a grandpa or a great uncle who claims that they were in the lynch mob that went after the homeless guy. Everybody has a cousin or a relation who was on the police force back then, who went and shook their heads at the poor old tramp and said that that sure was terrible. It was the kind of story that you could easily believe was true, even if you didn't really believe it right on top. For the next 3 years, kids started going missing. 2 or 3 a year would just vanish, and only the children knew what was really going on. Many of them told their parents how they'd heard someone whistling and calling their names from under their windowsill, and they supposed that a few kids must have even went with him. It was always a man in a long, dirty coat, his head covered by a red bandana, and his face covered in shadows. He would call to the children and tell them to come down and play, or to come down and see what he had in his bag. And the ones who did were never heard from again. The children told their parents about this, but none of them believed them. Most of them thought it was just scary stories the kids were making up, and that there was no real truth to this strange whistling traveler. Some of them, the ones who probably hung Tommy from that tree, even thought they were just making up tales based on what they had heard about the drifter himself. They all laughed and shook their heads and told the kids they needed some better stories. So the kids decided that if they were going to be safe, they'd have to take matters into their own hands. As I told the story, I could hear that clanking sound as it circled around in the woods outside town. I could hear it because it sounded like it was getting closer. We'd all grown up with the sound, so we were just kind of used to it. And sometimes, when the wind was right, it did seem like it moved, or like it was getting closer to where you were. It didn't matter how close it got, because it wasn't like anything ever came of it. We all knew to stay away from it, whatever it was, and the sound was as normal to us as catching the bus in the morning or saying our prayers before bedtime. So, the children got together. Not all of them, but enough of them to make a difference. There were about 12 of them, and my grandmother claims to have been one of those children. She says they decided that if the adults weren't going to keep them safe, then by God, they'd keep themselves safe. They would catch this man and make sure he never hurt anybody ever again. And they set up a plan so they could do just that. These two boys, the Tyson twins, set up a tent in their backyard and let it be known that they were going to have a camp out a week before Halloween. This seemed to be the easiest way to get the attention of whoever this was. He had taken most of the kids off the street after dark, or he'd taken them from in front of their houses at twilight. He didn't go into people's houses. That would have been dangerous. So the easiest way to get got was to be out after dark or be lured off by his whistling. The wind must have been exceptionally strong that night, because I remembered thinking that the whistling and the clinking sound was coming from the woods right behind my house. It made a great backdrop for the story. I could see Cameron and Joel leaning in as the story hit its stride, and Jerry was almost shaking as the Snicker bar he was holding sat forgotten. Sure enough, as the Tyson twins camped in their backyard, they heard a whistling and heard someone calling their name. They didn't leave the tent. They continued to stay in with the zipper held tight, and as the shadow of the man appeared across the side of their canvas, they were filled with fear. The fear didn't last, however, because 10 kids popped out of a nearby bush, and my grandmother says they beat the man to death. They had hammers and sticks and tools of all sort, and they came at him like the wrath of God. They beat and pounded on him as he fell to the ground, and as they stood over his body, they were sure that they had finally put an end to this. How wrong they were. That clinking sound was getting pretty loud. I'd never heard it get quite that loud before. It sounded like it might be right under my treehouse, and I was tempted to go to the window and see if some stray dog had got into a bunch of tin cans or something. A week later, Mickey Forrester went missing from the stoop of his own home. No one had seen or heard anything, but his mother said that he had been there one moment and gone the next. Mickey Forrester had been one of the kids to arrive to the meeting, and the rest of them were scared that now they had drawn targets on themselves. So the 11 kids met again and tried to figure out what to do. It was obvious now that the creature was not human, but that was almost more distressing. How does one kill a supernatural creature? Still, they tried again. They set another of their friends, a girl named Tessa, to sleep on her back porch and gathered to ambush the specter. He came, because of course he came, and once again they fell on him with pieces of wood and garden tools, pocket knives and slingshots, and everything else they could find to attack him with. He was unsurprised, and it almost seemed as if he let himself be beaten to the ground. They beat him, and even though he lay still again, they went to get an adult to see the man who was taking the children. They left some of them to watch him, but when the adults came, he disappeared like smoke on the water. The adults were cross, telling the children that this had gone on long enough. In that, the children agreed with them. So the kids decided that if they couldn't kill the man, someone they were thinking of as Tommy, since that was what the bum's name had been, they would at least find a way to warn others when he was near. So for the third time, because the third time is always the charm, they set up a trap, and they attacked the man who arrived to snatch one of their friends. The old ghost laughed and told them this was pointless. Eventually, they would not be so vigilant, and he would take another child. He said the town had taken his life, and now he would continue to take its children. So the kids told him that they couldn't kill him. They knew that. So they would give him something that would let others know when he was close. So they beat him into unconsciousness. And then they wound a string full of tin cans all over him. They wound him with so many cans that he looked like Jacob Marley when Scrooge saw him. They tied so many knots that he would have no hope of getting them off. They wound the strings together so that no matter how much he tugged and pulled, he couldn't get them off. Then they left him there, certain he would never bother anyone again. In that, the children were correct. Not that he would never bother anyone again, but that he would never take a child unaware, ever again. For now, every time he came near the town, you can hear him clank from a mile away. The wind will blow his cans, the trees will snag on his ropes, and he will forever be a prisoner of the town. It was decided that if he meant to stay, then he would be just as miserable as the children who he hunted. We were silent as the story came to an end, and I realized that the clinking I had heard had stopped. I looked over the edge of the treehouse, but there was nothing down there to be seen. The yard was empty. The only sound were the leaves rustling in the trees, and it appeared that Tin Can Tommy had gone on his way. He'd probably come to hear a story. Maybe he even liked being immortalized in tale. Whatever the case, we could all rest easy, knowing that he would never have us unaware, as he had taken the children in my grandmother's time. We would always know he was near, because it was impossible not to hear the clinking and clanking of Tin Can Tommy. I know I personally like to look into my local legends to see if there's anything I might could use. For research, of course, you understand. Moving right along, we hear a strange tale about a common problem, one where a child might overindulge on Halloween. And then what do we say? Ah, yes, that they have a bit of a sweet tooth. Come on, Andy, this place gives me the creeps. Andy and Mikey had been up and down the road all evening, and their sacks were practically bulging with Halloween candy. The two of them had done quite well, probably about 8 or 9 pounds of candy between them. But that's the thing about kids on Halloween. They never seem to be able to do well enough. They wanted more, and they all knew that in this neighborhood, a neighborhood like Cerulean Pines, there would always be more. The families here were as nuclear as the atom bomb. They all had 2.5 kids, a pension, a dog, and apple pie on Sundays after church. They always put on for the kids, and there was always another house to scope some treats from. The house they stood outside of now, however, was probably not the place to try their luck. Most of the houses on the block were nice enough, little ticky-tacky homes with picket fences and well-maintained lawns. It was the perfect sort of neighborhood to raise a family and live comfortably, which meant that the widow Douglas's house stood out like a sore thumb. The fence was in need of painting, the shutters were in a sorry state, and the whole place had an aura about it that just screamed, "Don't come here." The porch light was on, however, and the boys knew that there would be candy here, if candy was what they had a mind for. Scaredy cat, scaredy cat. What's the matter, Mikey? You afraid of the witch woman? All the kids in the neighborhood were afraid of the widow Douglas. Even Andy Marcus, despite his bluster. He knew that this house was trouble. Her husband had died a long time ago, probably before either of them had been born, so she'd always been the widow Douglas to them. To the children of the town, however, she would always be the witch woman. No one could say how the rumor had started, but like most rumors, it had taken off like wildfire. The witch woman was responsible for all the woes of the town, and was the constant scapegoat of those in need of one. When a well went dry or a crop failed, when the rain didn't come or a store you liked went under, even when you stubbed your toe or your dog got hit by a car, it was always the witch woman's fault. Some of it was just town gossip, but some of it might have been true. It really depended on who you asked and who you believed. Andy approached the house slowly, almost laughing, when he saw the sign that had become so familiar tonight. They had been up and down the block since 7 o'clock, hitting all the houses with lit front porches, and all of them had borne an unguarded candy bowl and a sign that said, "Take one." That was fine, of course, for kids who played by the rules, but Andy was not a child to be told what to do by a paper sign. They had mercilessly looted the bowls, dumping over half into their sacks before they disappeared down the road in search of another house with candy they could burglarize. Mikey was clearly uncomfortable with what they were doing, but Andy knew he wasn't going to speak out against him. The dynamic had been established long ago, and if Andy said they were going to do it, then that was just how it was going to go. The exception to that seemed to be the witch woman, but Andy was more than capable of pulling off this job by himself. Andy walked up the pathway that led to the house, his head turning from side to side as he checked to make sure he hadn't been noticed. He had gotten pretty good at this over the years. He would approach the house, and if he saw an adult on the porch, he would usually smile and accept his candy before heading somewhere else. If the adult didn't look like they were paying attention, then sometimes he would risk it anyway, but Mikey was usually in the habit of playing it safe. Most of the candy bowls had had no guardians, so the pair had pretty well taken what they wanted. The trees in the yard looked skeletal as he made his way up the overgrown path. He could hear the leaves rattling as they clung to the bare limbs for dear life. He nearly lost his nerve when he put his foot down on the top step. It loosed an eerie creak that he was sure you could hear from deep into the night. And the second step wasn't a lot better. No one came out to yell at him as he got close to the candy bowl on the front porch. The bowl was just sitting there on a little table. No one in sight to threaten him or scold him. He licked his lips as he reached out and pushed the sign over that proclaimed 1 per person. He picked up the bowl and dumped the whole thing into his bag, putting it down before tearing off for the sidewalk, like the old witch woman might already be after him. By the time he got back, he was out of breath, but he was laughing as Mikey asked him if he was okay. "Better than okay. I went and stole her candy, and she was none the wiser." As if in answer, Andy heard a muffled cackle come from the house, and the two of them took off down the road. Come on, Andy. Let's go home. We can eat a bunch of candy and be done for the night. My sack's getting awfully heavy, and I think I'm ready to pack it in." Andy started to answer, but instead, He reached into his sack and grabbed a piece of candy. He'd suddenly been struck with an overwhelming urge to eat some of what he had stolen tonight. He had eaten a little of the candy that they had taken that night. That was true, but this felt a little different. It was more than just a desire for sweets. It was something deep down that felt more like a need than anything. Andy opened the sack and reached inside again as they walked, selecting a piece and popping it into his mouth. It tasted amazing, but Andy found that he immediately wanted more. He reached in and pulled out another one and closed his eyes as he savored the taste that flooded his mouth. Had he ever enjoyed candy this much? He didn't know, but he'd be willing to bet not. This led him to want another piece, and as he grabbed the third, he felt Mikey touch his arm. Andy, let's go home. You got what you were after, and we got more candy than we can eat in a year. Let's just get out of here. Andy tried to articulate through the mouthful of candy that he did not want to go home, but it was hard when you couldn't form coherent words around all the sweets you had. He just kept eating the candy, really packing it away, and as he sat on the sidewalk and ate, he could see other kids staring at him. Andy would have normally been self-conscious about this, but at the moment he didn't care. His need to eat and his need to eat candy seemed to be the only thing on his mind. Mikey was looking on in horror as he shoveled it in, really filling his mouth with his ill-gotten loot from the night's work. Andy started just putting them in, wrapper and all, not really caring if the paper got stuck in his throat or not. His sack was beginning to empty, but Andy's hunger was far from gone. Andy, come on, Andy, you're scaring me. Let's just go home. This isn't funny. But Andy wasn't listening. The only thing that Andy was interested in was stuffing his face with as much candy as he could manage. His stomach began to fill, but still, Andy ate. When he turned and threw up a stomach full of half-digested wrappers and sweets onto the sidewalk, the adults began to take notice. When Andy went right back to stuffing the wrapped candy into his mouth, both hands working furiously, some of them tried to stop him. As they tried to pull the boy away from the bag of candy, he pushed them off and grabbed candy from the others who were nearby. He was like a wild animal, eating and eating at the candy that sat on the concrete before him. And as people started dialing 911, he began to groan as his insides bulged with the amount of sweets going into him. When the men in the ambulance tried to pull him off the bag, he bit them and tried to escape. They restrained him, however, and took him to the hospital before he did himself real harm. The police came to investigate, fearing the old catechism about drugs or poison being in the treats. They talked to Mikey, but they got very little of use out of him. The kid was frantic, saying again and again how it had been the fault of the witch. He didn't start acting like this until he took her candy. He was fine as ever, but then he took her candy, and that was when he started acting weird. The witch? One of the officers said, sounding nervous. The witch, yes, the one over on South Street. Everyone knows about her. The cops looked at each other, not really sure how to tell the boy that there was no way they were going to the widow Douglas's house. They had grown up in the small town as well, and they remembered not to cross the hunched old crone. They asked a few more questions, but when they flipped their notebooks closed, it was pretty clear what they intended to do. We'll look into it, kid. Thanks for your cooperation. Mikey just stood there as they drove away, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The police never bothered the widow Douglas. They knew better than to go bother a witch on what was likely the worst or best night of the year for her. The legend, however, changed slightly. The kids say that if you find candy on Halloween at the old Douglas place, you should avoid it like the plague. Mikey told everyone that the witch had poisoned Andy, and that was why he was gone and couldn't return to school. He told them how the police hadn't even gone to her house, but everyone knew that the witch was still there, just waiting for her next trick. It would have been impossible for Andy to have told the story himself. He spent the rest of his life in a medical facility as he raved and begged for candy. He had to be restrained, his food coming from a tube, lest he try to eat himself to death. He couldn't have sweets ever again, since they would send him into a frenzy, which would usually result in him harming himself or others. It seemed that the curse was a long-lasting one, and poor Andy hungered for sweets forevermore. We're really cruising right along, but let's go on to another story told by children around a fire. Another local legend about a child whose Halloween experience was less than stellar. Let's hear a tale about Wailing Marky. They say that if you see him on Halloween, say thank you for the jack-o'-lantern. They say that Stingy Jack was the first, and he still walks the earth long after his time is done. Everyone around the campfire clapped, and why not? It was a good story, a really good story. But I thought maybe I had one that could beat it. We've done this for as long as I can remember. We would do a little trick-or-treating, get our sacks good and full of candy, and then we would come out to the fire pit in the woods behind my house. We'd light up the fire and spend the rest of the evening telling ghost stories until some noise or another sent us running back inside with our candy after someone dumped a bucket of water over the fire so we didn't burn the woods down. Usually it was the big owl that lived in the dead tree, but one year we were sure we had heard someone walking through the woods after Terry told us a story about Wandering Tom. That had been more than enough to send us fleeing for the house, and it had been just the thing we needed to cap off the night. Elijah, Terry, Matthew, and I have been friends since kindergarten, but Elijah was the best storyteller out of our group. He always remembers the legends. He always creates the best stories, and it was widely agreed that he was the master storyteller of our group. That might be true, but I was pretty sure I had a story that would skunk him this year. My grandmother told me a story, I began, as the applause died down. It's about a boy that she knew as a kid, a boy named Wailing Marky. The other boys looked around in expectation, Elijah leaning a little closer as I began. They say that one night he went missing after he and his friends went on a Halloween campout in the woods. For a whole year, nobody knew what happened to Mark, or Marky, as everyone at school called him. His parents put up missing posters. His face was on milk cartons, but nothing seemed to be able to bring back poor old Marky. His friends had gone trick-or-treating that year, in his honor, collecting a bag of candy for Marky. But it wasn't until after the porch lights had gone off, and the kids were snug in their beds, that the legend truly began. They say that at 10 o'clock, everyone began hearing knocking at their door. Some of them thought it was trick-or-treaters out a little past the usual time, but when they opened the door, all they found was a boy in a bedsheet ghost costume, his face too pale and his eyes too dark. He would wail at them to help him. He would wail at them to let him in. And all of them would just scream and slam the door in his face. He went from door to door, knocking and banging, but no one would let him in, not even his own parents. One of his friends, a boy named Gabriel, remembered they had collected candy for him and put it on his porch after the second or third time that Marky came knocking. The legend said that when the ghost boy found the candy, he sat right there and began to eat. The next day, there was no Marky, but you could see the wrappers where the candy and the unchewed remains of the sweets beneath him were still sitting. Every year after that, a collection was taken up for wailing Marky and left on the porch of his old home. It's said that if his candy is not collected, then he will go door to door, knocking and wailing until he is provided with his due. My friends clapped and said it was a pretty good story, but Elijah crossed his arms and smirked. It was a good one, but it wasn't as good a story as mine. Plus, everybody knows that wailing Marky isn't real. It's just an urban legend. Nobody leaves candy out for him anymore. Lots of people leave candy out for him, Matthew said. I do, and I know a lot of kids put candy on their porch, or on the porch of his old house. We don't want him to come wailing up the road or anything. Oh, come on, Elijah said. There's no way any of you actually believe it. But when he looked up, he went white as a sheet and pointed to the log beside me. He stammered for a moment, his mouth quivering like a landed fish, and as Matthew and Terry looked where he was pointing, they too started mumbling and pointing at the spot beside me. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I would see, and sitting there on a log next to me was a pale boy in a homemade ghost costume. He was chewing something, candy, I suspect, and beside him on the ground, you could see the remnants of the wrappers. I couldn't believe it. It was wailing Marky, just like I'd said in the stories. He just looked up at us for a moment, his face devoid of joy or even mischief, and when he spoke, it sounded like someone talking from the bottom of a well. I wish people would stop telling stories about me, he said, giving us all dark looks as he continued to chew. That's not even really what happened. Nobody remembers how I actually came to be this way. All they remember is wailing Marky. It really makes me mad. What do you mean? Terry asked. Everybody knows about you. You're a town legend. The ghost boy huffed and put his hands on his hips like Terry had said the stupidest thing he had ever heard. That's just it. They all know what Gabriel told them, not what actually happened. It's because of Gabriel that I'm like this, not because I got lost and just never came back. What do you mean? I asked, not really sure I wanted to know. Are you saying that Gabriel killed you? The ghost boy shook his head in irritation. Of course not. Gabriel didn't have the stones to kill me or anyone else. What he did to me was much worse, and all because I told a secret about him. We all just sat there for a moment, waiting to see if he would continue. And when none of us asked, I supposed Marky decided to tell. It all started when I told some people a secret about Gabriel. I didn't mean to. It was just something that came out. Some kids were swapping secrets, and none of the ones I told were very good. They were older boys, people I wanted to be friends with, and so it just came out before I could stop myself. I told them that Gabriel still wet the bed sometimes, even though he was in the 4th grade. They laughed and said that was a good secret. But then they told Gabriel that I had said it. He was so angry. It spread across the school, and suddenly people were calling him Bedwetter and Squishy Gabe. He didn't speak to me or play with me for a week. Then one day, when he came up to me at recess, I thought we were ready to let bygones be bygones and be friends again. Boy, was I wrong. What did he do? Matthew breathed out. Gabriel said he had been thinking long and hard about the proper way to punish me. Gabriel's grandmother was someone people feared in town. People thought she might be a witch, but Gabriel said that she was just from the old country, and she had odd ways. Gabriel had talked to her about what should be done to me, and they decided that since I had told people his most embarrassing secret, he would make sure that nobody ever forgot a secret of mine. I don't know if he knew what would happen. I can't honestly believe that he did, or I don't think he would have done it, but that's when people started calling me Wailing Marky. He told them how I had wailed and run out of the movie theater during a scary movie the year before, and how I'd cried in the bathroom for nearly an hour afterwards. Nobody had seen me do it, and only Gabriel knew I had been the one who had screamed and ran out. People remembered the scream, though, even though the auditorium was dark, and nobody had known it was me. So he told people, and he started the nickname that would follow me forever. That was why I disappeared in the first place. What do you mean? I asked softly, afraid to speak too loudly. Well, Gabriel started telling a story about Halloween time, about Wailing Marky, and talked about a little ghost boy that ran around town and would have other people get his candy because he couldn't get it himself. People knew it was me. They knew who he was talking about, and they started calling me Wailing Marky all the time. A group of kids was following me home a couple of days before Halloween, chanting, Wailing Marky, Wailing Marky, and I just had enough. I ran into the woods, meaning to lose them, but I got lost, I suppose. I got lost in the woods, and it got dark, and his eyes got a dreamy quality about them, like he was trying to remember something that he just couldn't quite get a grip on. And I died. When I finally came out of the woods, no one seemed to be able to see me. They said they couldn't find me, and I was right there. I was right there, and no one could see me. They shouldn't. That should have been where it ended. But it didn't. It didn't end because people might have forgotten me, but they remembered that stupid story. Nobody remembered Marcus Register. They only remembered Wailing Marky, and in a way it gave me a sort of immortality. When something is remembered, it never truly goes away. People tell the story, and people remember the legend, and so I'm forced to walk the streets on Halloween forever. People still leave out candy. People still make jokes about seeing a wailing ghost on the road, and so until everyone has forgotten my story, I'm trapped here. So please don't tell that story anymore. I'm so tired of walking the streets and hearing people talk about me. I just want to go. I don't care what's beyond this. I just want to go. With that, he really did begin to wail. He cried and moaned, sounding like a freight train as the candy began to fall from his ghostly form. And all of us decided it was time to leave. We grabbed our candy and put out the fire and just left the little ghost screaming there as we ran for my house. The boys accused me of putting someone up to the act, but I told them I didn't know who that had been or why they were there. I don't think they quite believed me, though. Not until we went back the next day. When we went back, there were 2 perfect footprints in the dirt where he had been sitting, and the candy wrappers and remains of half-eaten candy were lying on the log and on the ground around the spot where the ghost boy had sat. We still don't know if it was a joke or the real Wailing Marky, but I've decided it might be time to stop telling the story. If it really is all that's keeping that ghost boy here, then maybe we owe it to him to let him be forgotten. One more story for you, and I guarantee I've saved a great one for last. A part of every good Halloween experience is treats, costumes, scary stories, and maybe a dare or two told to friends to get the blood pumping and the fear coursing. So let's hear a tale about a Halloween dare. You won't do it. Max's childish trill cut through the babble of the trick-or-treaters like an axe through rotten wood. There were 3 of them. Ralphie had already gone home, as his watch proclaimed it to be 9:30. There was Terry, TJ, to his friends, and Max, who thought himself the leader, but no one else did, and Kyle, who was probably closer to being the leader than Max ever had a prayer of being. Max, however, had thrown down the gauntlet tonight. Kyle would have to pick it up if he dared, or Max would definitely gain some clout amongst the group of boys. They were 12, a little too old to be trick-or-treating. At least that's the opinion of the women handing out candy to the kids in superhero costumes and princess dresses. And after a spotty showing of fun-sized candy bars, they had decided to have a different sort of Halloween entertainment. They had dared each other to go into the cemetery, none of them quite brave enough to take them up on it. Even Max had floundered when the suggestion was put out that he go sit on the grave of Harrison Marston, the man they had hung for killing those children over 100 years ago. Then they had gone to the abandoned laundromat, where the local legend said that a taxidermy shop had once sat. The taxidermy shop was supposed to taxidermize not just animals, but also people, if the price was right. It was also thought that the spirits of those people haunted the laundromat after dark, and that was why it had closed down. That was when Ralphie had proclaimed that his mother had wanted him home about 20 minutes ago, and that he better be going. Down a man, Max had decided that they should go to the Sugarman house, the house where Harrison Marston had supposedly committed his crimes back in the early days of the town. And here they were, standing outside the rotten picket fence that surrounded Sugarman House, all of them a little too afraid to actually go up and knock on the door. That was the dare. Every Halloween, someone got dared to walk up to the door of the Sugarman House and knock, using the big iron knocker that sat on it. It was said that the door would open sometimes, and you might get a look at Harrison Marston before you were yanked in by the front of your shirt and never seen again. No one had ever actually seen this happen. It was a story that was passed around, but children will believe most anything, which is probably why they're so fearful. All of the other houses in the area had big, beautiful fences, picket fences or wooden slat fences that had been painted white and gleamed in the streetlights. The Sugarman House had a rotten-looking fence that hung in sections all around the corner of the lot. It was town property, kept up by the roadway people and the town elders, and nobody seemed to actually want to keep the place. There was a lot of hemming and hawing about it around budget time, but the house had been slowly slipping into disrepair for the better part of a decade. The last owner had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the real estate market surrounding it had dwindled to little more than passing interest from the curious or the spiritual. These were all things that the boys had heard from their parents, not actually things they knew for a fact. Everything they knew about the Sugarman House came from town gossip or the legends told by children in dark broom closets or in empty bathroom stalls. In a lot of ways, local legends are kept alive by the town's children, because the scary ones are always the ones you remember. "You won't do it either," Kyle shot back. "I bet you won't even walk up the sidewalk," Max said as he put his hands on his hips. "Oh yeah? I bet you won't even make it to the steps." "Is that so? Well, I bet you're too chicken to go knock on the door." Kyle, thinking quickly, realized he hadn't been caught quite yet. He could escalate, and when Max failed to rise to his sally, then the matter would be settled for all time. Well, I bet you won't," Max floundered. I bet you won't go into the Sugarman House and bring something back." Kyle was speechless for a minute. That had never been the rules. The rule was that you went and you knocked on the door. The rule was that you walked halfway up the sidewalk and you lost your nerve. The rule was that you put your foot down on the porch and then ran away and told them all that you saw someone looking out the window at you and that you felt a presence and you just couldn't go in there, not on good conscience. No one actually went into the Sugarman House. It wasn't done. Nobody was stupid enough to go into that house. It was haunted, way more haunted than the laundromat or the graveyard, even more haunted than both of them put together. No one would be fool enough to go in there. No one, it seemed, except for him. I don't know why I would, because you certainly won't," Kyle shot back. That's when Max issued the challenge, the most inescapable catechism in the child's lexicon, and the thing amongst 12-year-olds that is absolutely inarguable. "I triple dog dare you." Kyle was speechless. Max had broken the sacred rule of never going straight to a triple dog dare. It wasn't done. You always escalated. You always worked your way up to the old triple dog dare. But here he was, facing down a triple dog dare and knowing that he couldn't refuse. If Kyle didn't go now, he could hang up being the leader of this clique or of any clique ever again. He'd be known as a wimp, a sissy, a yellow belly, and such titles would be as good as a black mark upon his forehead. He would walk the halls of Langtree Middle School as a social pariah, as an outcast. Kyle wasn't about to have that. Fine, I'll do it right now. Max and TJ looked at each other, both of them not expecting him to actually do it. Max had probably figured that Kyle would show how yellow he was, and then it would be unquestioning whether he should be the leader of the group or not. The idea that his friend and his rival might actually go through with it was unthinkable. Even so, the gauntlet had been thrown down, and now Kyle was going to take up the challenge. Our moms will notice if we're not home before 10 o'clock. That gives you about 25 minutes to go in there and get something and come back. If you're not back in 25 minutes, we're going home without you, and nobody will believe that anything you turn up with actually came from the Sugarman house. Kyle nodded and headed up the sidewalk. Kyle did not want to go into the Sugarman house. He hadn't even really wanted to go knock on the door. And as the two-story monstrosity loomed over him like the closed eyes of a sleeping giant, he began to reflect on how stupid he had been to agree. Stones shifted under his feet. The roots that had pushed up through them, having long ago made them unstable. And Kyle tried to make his eyes look anywhere and everywhere at once, as he took in the spooky old crypt he must now venture into. The porch steps creaked under his foot as he ascended them. There were no Halloween decorations on the house, but it hardly needed them. This old place could have given the Haunted Mansion a run for its money. No Disneyland Imagineer ever thought of this place, and if he did, then he probably had nightmares for a week. Kyle went up to the door, raising his hand to knock before remembering that was no longer the bet. His hand shook a little as he reached for the knob. And then the door opened, and he was as shocked as everyone else. The house was dark and musty, the interior cloaked in shadows that hung around the humped and cobwebbed furniture like lovers. The entryway held a mirror, an end table, and a coat rack with an umbrella caddy beneath it. Kyle walked shyly into the old house, his nostrils full of the damp and the rot that he had never thought about before smelling it. He had never smelled it quite this badly before, and he looked around the entryway for something to grab, an old umbrella or some bit of something left behind. But there was nothing. He supposed he could grab the umbrella stand, but it was firmly bolted to the ground. He went a little further in, deciding perhaps a little bit further wouldn't do him any harm. He found his way into the living room, though there was no TV in this one to pass the time. There was a huge rotten chair sitting next to a love seat that would have made an adequate home for rats. Inside the fireplace, he could hear the soft scratching of some disturbed animal, and when a few bats came out and made their loud and chittering way from the house, Kyle hit his knees and tried his best to stay small. When they'd finished leaving through the front door, likely frightening his friends as much as they had frightened him, Kyle proceeded deeper into the house. There was nothing in the living room either, no pictures or knickknacks to be taken. It was as if someone had scrubbed the place of everything but the heavy furniture that no one would want to steal. He cursed softly, using the language of small children who are new to the act, and cast his eyes upon the staircase that ran into the upper story. Everyone knew what lay up there. Sugarman House had very few secrets, and the fate of Mr. Marston was well known. The police had discovered what he was up to, had decided to go have a look before they took him in, but they never got the opportunity. The sheriff had come to the house, being careful not to spook the man, but he found no one there to receive him. They knocked and knocked, telling Mr. Marston that he might as well come out because he wasn't doing himself any favors by hiding. It was all just as quiet as it had always been, and after some time they began to get nervous. The man had to be home. His car was in the driveway after all, but he was nowhere to be seen, and no one could bring him out either. So eventually they broke down the door and went in to find him. What they found was his body hanging from the top floor chandelier, swinging in time with the rhythmic sway of his bedroom furnishings. They had cut him down, but people still said they could see that swinging body from the windows sometimes when they looked. Kyle felt himself being pulled inexorably towards the upper floor, towards the back room where he knew what he would find. Somehow, he knew that that was where he would get his trinket. They had taken everything from the house, except from that room. If you were going to find anything in that house, it would be in the master bedroom. He passed by the closed doors that rose up beside him in the gloom, like ghosts trying in vain to get his attention. How was he seeing any of this? He didn't have a light, and it should have been pitch black in here. The walls of the Sugarman house seemed to glow with a phosphorescence that was otherworldly and not altogether healthy. Kyle barely noticed. He only knew that he could see, and that was good. Seeing in this case was better than floundering around in the dark. And as he came to the door where Mr. Marston had ended his life, he swallowed spit into his dust-dry throat. He already knew what he would see before he opened the door. But open it he must. He was no more in control of his body than he was of his actions. And as the bedroom door slid open with a funhouse creak, he heard the groaning of the rope and could already see the dead man hanging there as if he were nothing but a silent accusation. Mr. Marston turned to look at Kyle, then, winking at him as the boy began to scream and the door slammed shut behind him. That scream sent the other children running, and when they came back with grown-ups, it was already too late. They searched the house for Kyle. The police searched the grounds for the boy, but he was nowhere to be found. They searched the surrounding neighborhood for days, but most people realized the futility before they even began. Kyle was not the first boy to go missing after finding his way into the Sugarman house, and most agreed he probably wouldn't be the last. Some local legends feed off the continued telling of their tales, but the Sugarman house, and likely the ghost of Mr. Marston, fed off nothing so much as the children who came to see if the legend was true. It had always been this way, and it would continue to be for as long as the house stood and the curiosity of children remained. The Sugarman house would feed. And just like that, our tales are at an end yet again. I do hope you'll join me tomorrow for more cozy Halloween horror with yours truly, Dr. Plague. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.